In the winter of 1887, a surveyor named Elias Kline walked into the mountains of eastern Kentucky and never walked out. He was not the first to disappear in those hills, and he would not be the last. But what made his case different, what made it linger in the memory of that place for generations, was what they found when they finally went looking for him. They found his Theodolite, its brass gleaming like a funeral bell in the gray December light. They found his boots, placed neatly side by side at the base of a chestnut tree. They found his notebook, its pages swollen with rain, the final entry scratched in a hand that had begun to shake. And they found the skull. Not his skull. The surveyor's skull was never recovered. No, this was a different skull, older, buried at the roots of that same chestnut tree, a single bullet hole drilled clean through the forehead. When the county coroner examined it, he estimated it had been in the ground for at least 30 years. 30 years before Elias Kline vanished into the hollows of Clay County, someone else had died there too. Someone whose name had been erased from every record. The surveyor's notebook, when the local preacher finally managed to decipher it, contained a single repeated phrase, written over and over like a prayer or a warning, *, the mountain knows. The mountain knows, *. Then the notebook was lost. And the skull was buried again, this time in an unmarked grave behind the church. And the people of that place, the people who had seen the surveyor walk into the woods and seen what walked back out, they learned to keep their mouths shut about what happened in the hollow. But the records were still there, buried in courthouse basements and forgotten archives. And they tell a story far stranger than any ghost tale. In the years after the Civil War, the mountains of eastern Kentucky were a place apart. The war had barely touched them, or rather, it had touched them in the way a fever touches a man already dying of hunger. Families had been divided, brothers fighting on opposite sides, but the real enemy in those hills was not the Union or the Confederacy. The real enemy was the mountain itself. The steep, unforgiving slopes. The thin soil that could barely support a crop of corn. The isolation that made every illness a death sentence and every crime a mystery that would never be solved. The people who lived there were survivors of a kind that no longer exists. They had come from the old countries, Scotland, Ireland, England, Germany, pushing westward until they found land so poor and so remote that no one else wanted it. They built cabins from the trees they felled, made their own cloth, grew their own food, lived and died in a world that might as well have been a century behind the rest of America. They were suspicious of outsiders. They had reason to be. Every stranger who came over the mountain brought trouble of one kind or another: land speculators, government officials, revenue agents, preachers of strange new faiths. And in the hollows, the dark places where the sun never reached, there was something else. Something that had been there long before the first Europeans set foot on the continent. The Cherokee had known it. They had named it the place of the dead, not a burial ground, but a place where the boundary between the living and the dead grew thin. They had avoided it for generations. The settlers had their own names for it. The breathing place. The hollow. Some said they could hear voices in the wind when the moon was full. Others whispered of lights that moved through the trees at night, lights that did not flicker like fire but glowed with a steady, inhuman light. They blamed it on the wolves, on the wind, on the whiskey they'd been drinking. But they knew better. Elias Kline arrived in Clay County in the spring of 1886. He was not a young man, 47 years old, with a receding hairline and hands that had spent more time holding a pencil than a plow. He was a surveyor for the federal government, tasked with mapping the boundaries of a new land grant that would, if all went according to plan, become the basis for a railroad through the mountains. The railroad was a dream of progress, of connecting the isolated hollers to the great cities of the East. It was also a dream of profit. The men who wanted to build it had paid handsomely for the survey. Elias was not a man given to superstition. He had worked in a dozen territories, crossed the plains, survived encounters with outlaws and natives alike. He had seen men die of thirst and men die of greed. He had no patience for talk of ghosts and haints and mountain spirits. But even he noticed something strange about that place. The people of the hollow, there weren't many, perhaps 24 families scattered over 30 miles of impossible terrain, seemed to avoid one particular valley. They called it the Dead Run, a name that had been on maps since before the war, but they never spoke of it except in whispers. When Elias asked about it, they changed the subject. When he pressed, they told him he would be better off taking a different route. He did not take a different route. His notes from the spring of 1886 are meticulous. He measured distances, recorded elevations, noted the quality of the soil and the species of trees. He sketched the contours of the land with the precision of a man who had been doing this for 20 years. But somewhere in the middle of April, the notes begin to change. They become disjointed, strange. He writes about hearing things at night. Strange cries, he says, like nothing I have ever heard from an animal. He writes about dreaming of a woman in white, standing at the edge of a cliff, reaching out to him. He writes about the sensation of being watched, of eyes following him through the trees. He was not alone on the survey. He had a crew of 3 men, a chainman named William Hargis, a flagman named Jesse Morgan, and a cook named Caleb Reeves, a freedman who had come north after the war and found his way to the mountains. But in his notes, Elias Kline begins to refer to them as the others, as if they had become strangers to him. He complains about their insolence and their disrespect. He accuses them of conspiring against him. Then, in May, he sent his crew away. The official report says that he dismissed them, that he believed he could complete the survey more efficiently on his own. But the men told a different story when they came down from the mountain. They said Elias had become erratic, paranoid. He had accused them of trying to steal his instruments. He had brandished his compass at them like a weapon. He had shouted that the mountain was speaking to him and that they were interfering with the message. They left him there, alone, at the edge of the Dead Run. That was the last time anyone saw Elias Kline alive. The search for him began a week later, when the crew returned to the county seat with their story. The sheriff of Clay County was a man named Hollis Dean, a former Union soldier who had lost an eye at Shiloh and gained a reputation for toughness. He had been sheriff for 12 years and had seen every kind of crime, from moonshine feuds to killing over hogs. He didn't believe in ghosts, and he didn't believe in mountain spirits. He believed in facts. But the facts in this case were not easy to come by. Hollis led a party of 12 men up into the hollow. They found Elias's camp abandoned. They found his personal belongings, a change of clothes, his razor, a Bible left behind as if he had simply walked away. They found his tracks leading deeper into the Dead Run, then they found where the tracks stopped, as if he had been lifted off the ground and carried away. They searched for 3 days. They found no sign of him. But on the 3rd day, one of the searchers, a young man named Zebulon Smith, stumbled upon the chestnut tree at the head of the hollow. At its base, he saw something gleaming. It was Elias's Theodolite, the most valuable piece of equipment he had carried. It had been placed deliberately, carefully, as if left as a marker. Next to it, there was a pile of stones. When Zebulon moved them, he found the skull. He didn't recognize it at first. He thought it must be an animal, a bear or a deer. But then he saw the bullet hole. Then he saw the shape of the jaw. It was human. It was unquestionably human. Zebulon ran back to tell the sheriff what he had found. By the time the search party reached the tree, the Theodolite was gone. The skull was gone. Even the stones had been scattered. The only thing left was a single, muddy footprint that did not match any of the men in the search party. Someone had been there. Someone who knew exactly where the object was. Someone who had been watching. The story of Elias Kline's disappearance spread quickly through the region. The newspapers picked it up, printing sensational headlines about the mystery of the hollow and the lost surveyor. One paper in Louisville even ran an illustration of Elias's ghost standing at the edge of a cliff, his compass raised to the sky. But the locals knew better than to believe what they read in the papers. They knew the real stories, the ones that had never been printed. And as the weeks passed and Elias Kline remained unfound, those stories began to resurface. The first story concerned a man named Silas Weatherby. In 1855, 30 years before Elias Kline arrived, Silas Weatherby had walked into the Dead Run and never walked out. He was a logger, a man who had spent his life in the woods, who knew every tree and every stream in that county. He was a man who could survive anything. But he could not survive the hollow. His body was found 3 days after he disappeared, at the base of a chestnut tree. The same chestnut tree, the one at the head of the dead run. He had been shot through the head. His boots were missing. His axe was found at his side, clean, as if it had never been used. The killing was blamed on bushwhackers, deserters from the Confederate Army who had taken to the hills. But Silas Weatherby had been a popular man, a man with no enemies. He didn't owe money. He didn't have a gambling debt. He wasn't involved in a feud. So why had someone killed him? Why had they left his body at the base of a tree, a single bullet through the brain? And why, in the 30 years since his murder, had no one ever found his boots? The second story concerned the woman who lived beyond the hollow, a widow known only as Maggie. She had come to the mountains in the 1840s, alone, pregnant, refusing to speak of her past. She lived in a cabin at the edge of the dead run, so close to the forbidden place that the other settlers thought she must be insane. Or perhaps she wasn't insane at all. Perhaps she had come to the hollow intentionally, seeking something that no one else dared to seek. In 1850, Maggie's child was born. A girl. She named her Grace. They lived together in the cabin, mother and daughter, untouched by the world beyond the hollow. The girl grew up with the forest as her playground, the creatures of the woods as her companions. She knew the trails better than any man. She could track a deer through a foot of snow, read the signs of the forest like a book. In 1867, 12 years after Silas Weatherby's murder, Grace went into the dead run and did not come back. Maggie searched for her for days, screaming her daughter's name into the empty forest, but she found nothing. She found only a single boot, Grace's boot, at the base of a chestnut tree. Maggie lived for another 20 years after her daughter's disappearance, but she was never the same. She told anyone who would listen that the hollow took her, that the mountain claimed her. She said that she could still hear Grace's voice on the wind, calling for help, calling for mercy. In 1887, the year after Elias Kline vanished, Maggie finally died. She was found in her cabin, her face peaceful, her hands folded over her chest. She had been dead for 3 days before anyone found her. But there was something strange about her death, something that no one could explain. On her chest, clasped in her folded hands, was a single bullet. A .44 caliber round, identical to the one that had killed Silas Weatherby 3 decades earlier. The same caliber. The same make. It was as if the mountain had reached into her cabin, placed that bullet in her hands, and waited for her to die. The third story was the one that no one spoke of. It concerned a man who had died long before Silas Weatherby, long before Maggie had come to the mountains. A man whose name had been erased from every record, whose grave had been forgotten. He was a preacher. A circuit rider who had come to the mountains in the 1830s to bring the gospel to the lost souls of the hollows. His name was Levi Stone. He had been a charismatic figure, a man of deep faith who could speak for hours without pause. He had a reputation for healing the sick, for casting out demons, for doing things that no ordinary man could do. He also had a reputation for cruelty. He had an iron will, a fierce temper, a belief that he was answerable to no one but God. He punished those who disobeyed him. He threatened the women who resisted him. He treated the mountaineers as if they were children, unworthy of his respect. In 1838, Levi Stone walked into the dead run and did not come back. The people of the hollow searched for him but found nothing. They assumed he had been killed by Indians or by wild animals. But then, they began to hear things. They heard his voice in the wind. They heard his sermons echoing through the trees at night. They saw his shadow moving through the hollow, carrying a lantern that burned with a sickly green light. He had not been taken by the mountain. The mountain had taken him, swallowed him whole, made him part of its fabric. He was the hollow now. He was the thing that waited for the living to stray into its domain. When Elias Kline vanished, the people of Clay County said nothing to the newspapers about Levi Stone. They said nothing about Silas Weatherby. They said nothing about grace. They knew what the hollow did to those who spoke of its secrets. They knew the price of silence and the price of breaking it. But the records survived. They survived in county courthouses and church archives. They survived in the notebooks of the surveyor and the testimony of his crew. And they tell a story far stranger than the official narrative would suggest. The official story of Elias Kline's disappearance is a simple one. He got lost. He died of exposure. His body was eaten by animals. That was the conclusion of the coroner's inquest, the verdict that allowed the county to close the case and move on. But the unofficial story, the one that survives in the whispers of old men and the diaries of forgotten women, is far more complex. It involves a conspiracy of silence that stretched back decades. It involves a network of cover-ups and lies. It involves the murder of Silas Weatherby, the disappearance of Grace, the death of Maggie. It involves a secret that the people of Clay County had kept for generations, a secret that they would do anything to protect. The secret had its roots in the soil of the hollow itself. The chestnut tree at the head of the dead run was not just a tree. It was a marker, a boundary stone, a sign that the living had come to the edge of a place where they had no business being. Beneath that tree, according to legend, was a cave. A hidden entrance to the underworld, a place where the dead walked and the living could not follow. The Cherokee had known it. They had sealed it centuries ago, sealed it with stones and prayers and the blood of their ancestors. But the white settlers had reopened it. Not deliberately. They had stumbled upon it, as they had stumbled upon so many things in their rush to conquer the continent. They had found the cave and they had entered it, thinking they would find gold or treasure or some other prize. Instead, they found something worse. They found the spirits of the dead, waiting in the darkness. They found the breathing place, a hollow where the veil between the worlds was thin. They found the thing that had been waiting there since the beginning of time, the ancient hunger that had fed on the souls of the living for eons. And they had tried to seal it again. They had tried to forget what they had seen. But the thing in the hollow remembered. It had tasted the living and it wanted more. Elias Kline was not just a surveyor. He was a man who had seen the secret and tried to understand it. He had felt the hunger in the hollow and tried to explain it to the people who would not listen. He had written in his notebook about strange energies and ancient presences, using the language of science to describe something that was beyond science. But the mountain knew. And the mountain had claimed him. His body was never found. Some say he walked into the cave and never came out. Some say he became part of the hollow, another ghost to haunt the breathing place. Some say he escaped, transformed by his experience into something more than human. The truth is we will never know. The secret of the hollow was kept not because of evil but because of terror. The people of Clay County did not want to know what happened to Elias Kline. They did not want to know what had happened to Silas Weatherby or Grace or Levi Stone. They wanted to forget that the hollow existed, to pretend that the breathing place was just a legend, a ghost story to frighten children. But the hollow is still there. The chestnut tree still stands, its roots twining around the entrance to the cave. The dead still walk beneath the mountain, waiting for the living to stray too close. And somewhere, in the dark, a man named Elias Kline is still waiting for someone to find him. He is still writing in his notebook, trying to explain what he found in the hollow. He is still whispering a single phrase, over and over, like a prayer or a warning. The mountain knows. The question that remains, the question that has no answer, is whether we are ready to listen. Whether we are ready to understand what the mountain knows. Whether we are ready to face the hunger that waits in the dark, beneath the roots of the chestnut tree, at the head of the dead run. Elias Kline was not the first to find it. He was not the first to disappear. And he will not be the last. Because the hollow is patient. It has waited for centuries. It can wait for a few more years, a few more lifetimes, until another curious soul wanders too close and hears the voice in the wind. The voice that whispers of secrets. The voice that promises truth. The voice that knows the mountain's secrets and will never share them with the living. The courthouse in Manchester, Kentucky, burned down in 1892, taking most of the county records with it. The official story says it was an accident, a faulty stovepipe. But those who remember the old stories, the ones their grandparents whispered by the fire, they say something different. They say the fire was deliberate. They say it was lit by someone who wanted to hide the truth about the hollow, who wanted to erase the evidence that the mountain had been feeding on the living for generations. And they succeeded. The records are gone. The evidence is gone. All that remains is the story, the whispered legend of a place where the dead walk and the living disappear. Elias Kline's family, what little was left of them, moved to Ohio in 1890. They never spoke of what happened to their father. They never returned to Kentucky. They tried to forget the mountain that had taken him, the hollow that had swallowed him whole. But they could not forget. The memory lingered, like a wound that would not heal. And when they died, they asked to be buried facing east, toward the mountains, toward the place where the sun rose over the hills and the truth still slept beneath the chestnut tree. In the summer of 1972, a group of spelunkers from the University of Kentucky explored a cave system in the mountains of eastern Kentucky. They found a network of chambers that had never been mapped, a labyrinth of tunnels that stretched deep into the earth. In one of the chambers, they found a human skeleton, well preserved by the cool, dry air of the cave. The skeleton was wearing the remnants of what appeared to be a pair of boots, leather so rotted that it crumbled at the touch. They never identified the skeleton. The coroner estimated the remains were at least a century old. There were no weapons, no personal effects, no way to determine who the person had been or how they had died. The caves were sealed off soon after, declared unsafe for exploration. But the spelunkers said something else, something that was never recorded in the official report. They said the skeleton was found sitting upright, as if it had been waiting for someone to find it. Its hands were folded in its lap, and on its chest, clasped in its bony fingers, was a single .44 caliber bullet. The mountain still knows. The hollow still waits. And somewhere, in the dark, a man named Elias Kline is still writing in his notebook, trying to explain what he found at the head of the dead run, beneath the roots of the chestnut tree. He is still waiting for someone to listen. But the question remains, the question that has no answer. Are we ready to listen? The end.